It was the third time that month I tried. The room was cold, the kind of chill that sinks into your bones, and Kathleen was already buried under the blankets, her back to me. I reached out, my hand brushing her shoulder, and she stiffened. Not the good kind of stiffening. The kind that says, don't even think about it. Not tonight, she mumbled, her voice muffled by the pillow. I'm exhausted. I pulled my hand back like I touched a hot stove. Okay, I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. But inside, something sharp twisted in my gut. 3 months. 3 damn months since we'd been intimate. And every time I tried, it was the same excuse. I'm tired. Work's been crazy. It's not a priority right now. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of her laptop fan from the living room. She'd been working late every night for weeks, her screen casting a blue glow through the crack under our bedroom door. I'd stopped asking her to come to bed. Stopped asking her if she wanted to watch a movie or grab dinner. Stopped asking, period. Because every time I did, her answers were clipped, distracted, like I was interrupting something far more important. The cold knot in my stomach tightened. I turned on my side, facing away from her, and pulled the blanket up to my chin. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from her. I stared at it, the screen lighting up the room for a split second before going dark again. She'd sent it from the living room, 10 feet away. Can you grab milk tomorrow? I didn't reply. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. Kathleen was already gone, her side of the sheets neatly pulled up, like she hadn't even slept there. I dragged myself to the kitchen, where the smell of burnt coffee lingered. Her mug sat on the counter, half full, a lipstick stain smeared on the rim. I poured it down the sink and made a fresh pot, but even the aroma couldn't shake the hollow feeling in my chest. Her laptop was still open on the couch, the screen dark but warm to the touch. I hesitated, then tapped the spacebar. It lit up, revealing a spreadsheet filled with numbers and dates. Work stuff, I guessed. But something caught my eye, a tab opened to a hotel booking site. I clicked on it and my stomach dropped. A reservation for next weekend. For one. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking slightly. The cold knot in my stomach was back, heavier this time. I wanted to believe it was work-related. Wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. But the unanswered texts, the late nights, the way she flinched when I touched her, it all added up to something I wasn't ready to face. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The house was too quiet, the silence pressing in on me like a weight. I thought about calling her, asking her to explain. But what would I say? Hey Kathleen, why are you booking a hotel room for one? And what if she had a reasonable answer? What if I was just being paranoid? I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness lingering on my tongue. The cold knot in my stomach wasn't just about the intimacy, or lack thereof. It was about the distance. The way she looked through me now, like I was a stranger in my own home. The way her priorities had shifted, leaving me stranded on the outskirts of her life. I finished my coffee and got dressed, the silence following me like a shadow. As I headed out the door, I glanced at her laptop one last time. The screen was dark, but the questions it had raised were anything but. It was Monday morning, and I was doing laundry, something I'd started handling more often since Kathleen's workload had supposedly doubled. Her jacket was crumpled on the floor of the closet, the same black blazer she'd worn last Thursday. She'd come home late that night, her hair slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed. Another marathon meeting, she'd said, tossing her bag onto the kitchen counter. I'd nodded, pretending not to notice the faint scent of wine on her breath or the way her eyes avoided mine. As I pulled the jacket from the pile, something slipped out of the pocket, a small, crumpled receipt. I smoothed it out, my fingers trembling slightly. The Grand Horizon Hotel. Room service charge. 2 glasses of Merlot. A timestamp from 9:47 p.m. The same night she'd told me she was stuck in the office. My stomach churned, but my hands were steady, almost unnaturally so. I stared at the numbers, the letters, the date, as if they might rearrange themselves into some explanation that didn't feel like a knife twisting in my chest. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I folded the receipt neatly and tucked it into my wallet, like some kind of morbid keepsake. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee I didn't really want. Kathleen was in the living room, her laptop open, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She'd been distant for months, but now every detail seemed magnified. The way she'd pause typing to glance at her phone, the faint smile that flickered across her face when she thought I wasn't looking, the sharp tang of her perfume lingering in the air, a scent that suddenly felt foreign, almost invasive. The empty wine glass on the counter caught the light, a silent accusation. I'd asked her about it earlier, casually, like it didn't matter. "Oh, I had a drink with a colleague after the meeting," she'd said, not even looking up from her screen. A colleague. The word echoed in my head, hollow and heavy. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but instead, I sat there, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. I thought about the hotel receipt, about the Merlot, about the way she'd come home that night, her energy buzzing, her excuses smooth and practiced. I thought about all the times I'd brushed off my suspicions, told myself I was being paranoid, that Kathleen couldn't do this to us. But now, the evidence was right there, tucked into my wallet, a cold, crumpled reminder that the life we'd built together might be nothing more than a facade. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, cloying and sweet, and for the first time, it made me nauseous. I wanted to throw open the windows, to let the cold night air wash it away. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the empty glass, the receipt burning a hole in my pocket, and wondered how many more lies were waiting to surface. The air in the room felt heavy, like the weight of a storm that hadn't broken yet. Kathleen sat across from me, her fingers twisting the wedding ring I'd slipped onto her hand 5 years ago. The diamond caught the light, sending little shards of brightness across the wall, but it felt like a mockery now. She didn't look at me, not really. Her eyes were fixed somewhere over my shoulder, as if she were already halfway out the door. "It's just passion, Jason," she said, her voice calm, almost dismissive. "You wouldn't understand." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. Couldn't. My hands were clenched so tightly on the edge of the couch that I could feel the fabric digging into my palms. Passion. She said it like it was some noble cause, like she was the heroine in a story I wasn't allowed to be part of. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to ask her how she could reduce everything we'd built to something so flimsy, so disposable. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, numb, watching her fidget with that ring like it was nothing more than a piece of costume jewelry. Her gaze flicked to me briefly, defiant, almost daring me to argue. There was no guilt there, no shame, just this cold, detached confidence. It was like she'd already rewritten the story in her head, and I was just a footnote. I wanted to ask her when it started, how long she'd been lying to me, but the questions felt pointless. The answers wouldn't change anything. They wouldn't undo the nights she'd come home late, smelling faintly of someone else's cologne, or the way she'd brushed off my attempts to reconnect, always too tired, too busy. My eyes drifted to the suitcase in the corner, half-packed, clothes spilling out of it like a wound that hadn't been stitched shut yet. It wasn't even a proper suitcase, just some cheap duffel bag she'd probably grabbed in a hurry. I wondered if she'd been planning to leave tonight, or if this was just another one of her rehearsals, another way to test the waters without fully committing. She always did that, dipped her toes in, never fully dove in. Except, apparently, when it came to him. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. It wasn't the question I wanted to ask, but it was the one that came out. She hesitated, her fingers stilling on the ring. For a second, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But then she shrugged, that same infuriating nonchalance slipping back into place. "It's not about love, Jason. It's about feeling alive." I almost laughed. Alive. Like our life together had been some kind of death sentence. Like the quiet nights we'd spent on the couch, her head on my shoulder, had been some kind of prison. I wanted to throw it all back in her face. The trips we'd taken, the inside jokes, the way she'd cried when I surprised her with that stupid puppy she'd wanted so badly. But what was the point? She'd already decided none of it mattered. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The world kept going, even though mine had just stopped. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to say something, to beg, to yell, to do anything. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at the reflection of her in the glass, her defiant gaze, her nervous hands, the suitcase waiting in the corner. "You should go," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. "If that's what you want." She didn't argue. She didn't even try to explain. She just stood up, grabbed the duffel bag, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was alone. The house felt emptier than it ever had before, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. And then, finally, I let myself cry. The living room felt like a museum of a life I no longer recognized. The trophy case, once a source of pride, filled with little victories from our marriage, now just collected dust. I didn't remember the last time I'd bothered to polish the glass. Inside, there was a softball trophy from the league we joined together during our second year of marriage. A seashell from that trip to Cancun where we'd stayed up all night talking about the future. A framed photo of us on our wedding day, her smile wide and genuine, my arm around her waist like I'd never let go. It was all still there, but it felt hollow now, like relics from someone else's life. The TV was off, which was unusual. Kathleen used to leave it on all the time, even when no one was watching. She said it made the house feel less empty. Now the silence was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. My eyes kept drifting back to that wedding photo. I remembered how she'd laughed when I'd fumbled the ring during the ceremony, how she'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "It's okay. We've got forever." Forever. What a joke. I stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. My hands clenched and unclenched at my sides, the anger bubbling up in waves. I wanted to smash something, the trophy case, the TV, anything to break the suffocating stillness. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself staring at the photo again, tracing the outline of her face with my eyes. How had we gone from that to this? How had she gone from the woman who cried happy tears when I surprised her with breakfast in bed to the woman who could look me in the eye and say, "It's just passion, Jason. You wouldn't understand?" I sank back into the couch, my head in my hands. The smell of her perfume still lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. It used to make me smile, that scent. Now it just made my stomach twist. I thought about the nights I'd spent waiting up for her, the unanswered texts, the excuses. Working late. Girls' night. Just need some time to myself. How many of those nights had she been with him? How many times had I sat here, oblivious, while she was out chasing whatever it was she thought I couldn't give her? The anger flared again, hot and sharp, but it didn't last. It never did. It just burned out, leaving me empty. I felt like a fool, not just for not seeing it sooner, but for believing in the fairy tale in the first place. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to leave you sitting alone in a silent room, staring at a dusty trophy case and wondering where the hell it all went wrong. I reached for the remote, flipping the TV on just to drown out the thoughts. Some sitcom was playing, the canned laughter grating against my nerves. I didn't care. I just needed the noise. The sound of people pretending to be happy. It was better than the silence. But even with the TV blaring, I couldn't stop thinking about her. About us. About the life we'd built together and the life she'd chosen instead. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the flickering screen, wondering how long it would take before the ache in my chest went away. Wondering if it ever would. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's pressing down on you, heavy and suffocating. Kathleen had left for the evening. "Another work event," she'd said, her voice clipped, her eyes avoiding mine. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. The truth was already there, coiled in the air between us like a snake waiting to strike. I sat at the desk in the study, the room lit only by the dim glow of the desk lamp. The light pooled around the legal document in front of me, the edges of the paper sharp and precise. My pen hovered over the blank lines, the weight of it steady in my hand. This wasn't about anger anymore. Anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something colder, clearer. This was about survival. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall was the only noise, each second slicing through the silence. I stared at the document, the words blurring slightly as my mind wandered. The desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, and for a moment, I felt like I was sitting in the eye of a storm. Everything around me was chaos, But here, in this small circle of light, there was calm, purpose. I thought about the life we'd built together, the trophies and mementos in the case across the room gathering dust. They were supposed to be symbols of our triumphs, but now they just felt like relics of a life that no longer existed. Kathleen had made her choices, and they didn't include me. Not really. Not anymore. And that was fine. It had to be. My lawyer's number was already pulled up on my phone, the screen glowing faintly beside the document. I didn't hesitate when I hit the call button. The conversation was brief, professional. No drama, no theatrics, just facts. I gave him my instructions, my voice steady, my mind clear. When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I'd finally taken control of something that had been spiraling out of my grasp for months. The pen moved across the paper, my signature sharp and deliberate. Each stroke felt like a step forward, away from the wreckage of what we'd been and toward something new. I didn't know what that something was yet, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that it was mine. My life, my choices, my future. I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking softly under my weight, and stared at the document. The dim light of the lamp made the ink glisten faintly, like it was still wet. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The storm was coming, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. Let it come. I was ready. The ticking of the clock in the kitchen was the only sound in the house that night, each second a hammer strike against the silence. Kathleen sat across from me at the table, her face glowing with that casual, oblivious confidence she'd worn so often lately. She was scrolling through her phone, her wine glass half empty, when she dropped the bomb like it was nothing. "You know," she said, not even looking up, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we start trying for a baby. I mean, we're not getting any younger, right?" I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there, staring at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a stone. A baby. She wanted a baby. With me. The absurdity of it was almost funny, if it weren't so gut-wrenching. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table, and for a moment, I thought I might laugh or scream. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo I'd been carrying for weeks. It was creased from how often I'd unfolded it, stared at it, tried to make sense of it. A newborn baby, swaddled in a hospital blanket, his tiny face scrunched up in that way all newborns do. I slid it across the table toward her, the sound of the paper scraping against the wood cutting through the silence. For the first time in months, Kathleen looked up from her phone. Her eyes flicked to the photo, then to me, then back to the photo. Her brows furrowed, and I could see the gears turning in her head, the slow dawning of realization. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Just a soft, almost imperceptible exhale. "That's his," I said, my voice steady, though my chest felt like it was on fire. "Your lover's son. Born 3 months ago. Congratulations, Kathleen. You're a stepmom now." The clock kept ticking. Kathleen's face went pale, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. Her hand trembled as she reached for the photo, her fingers brushing against it but not picking it up. She just stared at it, her breathing shallow, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear, or maybe shame. She started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice low and cold. "Don't even try to explain. I know everything. I've known for months. I've sat here, night after night, watching you lie to my face, pretending everything was fine. And now you want a baby? With me? After you've been sneaking around with him, building a life with him? Do you even hear yourself?" She flinched at the venom in my voice, her hand retreating from the photo like it had burned her. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Not after what she'd done. Not after the nights I'd spent alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I wasn't enough for her. "Jason," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what?" I snapped, my patience finally snapping. "Didn't mean to cheat? Didn't mean to lie? Didn't mean to bring a child into this mess? What exactly didn't you mean to do, Kathleen?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, her hands clutching the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The clock kept ticking, each second a reminder of the time we'd lost, the trust we'd broken. the life we'd never get back. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, and walked to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The photo was still on the table, a silent accusation, a reminder of everything she'd thrown away. And as I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, finally, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Kathleen stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling like leaves in a storm. She clutched the edge of the countertop, her nails digging into the laminate as if it could steady her. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. She looked small, fragile, a far cry from the woman who had once held my heart in her hands. "Jason," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you like this." I sat at the table, my fingers wrapped around a half-empty coffee cup. The steam had long since faded, leaving the liquid cold and bitter. I stared at it, watching the faint ripple as my hand trembled. Not from anger, not anymore, just from exhaustion, from the weight of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. "You made your priorities clear," I said, my voice steady, almost detached. "You chose him. You chose passion." The word tasted sour on my tongue, but I didn't let it show. She flinched, her hands dropping to her sides. "It wasn't about passion. It was, I don't know. I was confused, lost. I thought I needed something more, but I was wrong. I need you, Jason. I need us." I looked up at her then, really looked at her. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had built a life with. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged. She looked like a stranger. "You don't get to do this," I said quietly. "You don't get to rewrite history, to pretend this was some grand misunderstanding. You made a choice, Kathleen, and now I'm making mine." She stepped forward, her hand reaching out as if to touch me, but I leaned back, just enough to make her stop. Her fingers curled into a fist, and she let it drop. "I'll do anything," she said, her voice breaking. "Anything to fix this. Please, Jason, don't throw us away." I stood then, the chair scraping against the floor. The sound was loud in the silence of the kitchen. I set the coffee cup down, the porcelain clinking against the table. "You already did that," I said, my voice low but firm. "You threw us away the moment you decided I wasn't enough. The moment you decided to lie to me, to sneak around, to—" I stopped myself, swallowing the rest of the sentence. There was no point in rehashing it. The damage was done. She stared at me, her eyes wide and pleading. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might try to convince me I was wrong. But then her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded, more to myself than to her. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't change anything." I walked past her then, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. I didn't look back. Couldn't. If I did, I might have faltered, might have let her see the cracks in my resolve. But I couldn't afford to do that. Not now. As I reached the doorway, I heard her voice again, soft and broken. "Jason, what happens now?" I paused, my hand resting on the doorframe. For a moment, I didn't answer. Then, without turning around, I said, "Now we move on." And I walked away, leaving her standing there, her trembling hands and tear-streaked face etched into the silence of the kitchen. The coffee cup sat on the table, cold and forgotten, just like the life we had built together. The suitcase sat open on the bed, its dark interior swallowing up the remnants of my life in this house. I moved methodically, folding shirts and stacking them like bricks in a wall I was building between us. The closet door creaked as I opened it, and the sound echoed in the emptiness. Half the hangers were bare now, their metal hooks gleaming in the dim light like question marks. I pulled a sweater from the rack, and the hanger swung wildly, clinking against the others in a discordant chorus. That's when I saw it, tucked into the far corner of the closet like an afterthought. The baseball glove. The leather was worn soft, the laces frayed at the edges, but it still smelled faintly of oil and dirt. She'd given it to me on our first anniversary. A gift wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "For all the games we'll watch together," she'd said, her eyes shining with a kind of hope that felt so distant now it might as well have belonged to someone else. I turned the glove over in my hands, my fingers tracing the initials she'd had embossed on the wrist. J plus K. For a moment I let myself remember. The way she'd laughed when I fumbled the first catch. The way she cheered when I finally got it right. The way she'd leaned into me that night, her breath warm against my neck as she whispered, "You're my MVP." But the memory felt brittle, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I set the glove down on the bed, the leather creaking softly as it settled against the comforter. The suitcase was nearly full now, its weight a tangible reminder of how much I was leaving behind. I zipped it shut, the sound sharp and final, and dragged it to the door. The empty hangers swayed gently as I passed, their movement almost hypnotic. I paused at the threshold, my hand resting on the cool metal of the doorknob, and glanced back at the glove. It looked small and out of place against the expanse of white sheets, like a relic from a life that no longer existed. I didn't take it with me. The front door clicked shut behind me, the sound swallowed by the stillness of the house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the driveway, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and gasoline. I loaded the suitcase into the trunk, the weight of it grounding me in the present. As I slid into the driver's seat, I caught a glimpse of the glove through the window, a dark shape against the pale sheets. It looked like a goodbye. The engine roared to life, and I pulled out of the driveway without looking back. The streetlights flickered on one by one, their glow washing over the car like a tide. I rolled down the window, letting the cool air rush in, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The glove, the house, the memories, they were all behind me now, and for once that felt like enough. The road stretched out ahead, lit by the fading light of the day, and I pressed down on the gas, leaving the past in the rearview mirror. The day the divorce papers were finalized, I stood on the baseball field, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the diamond. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and the faint tang of sunscreen. I watched the kids I coach, 10-year-olds with more energy than sense, chasing each other around the bases, their laughter echoing like wind chimes in the breeze. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the weight lift off my chest. Not all at once, but in small, steady increments, like a slow leak from a tire that's been overinflated for too long. The kids didn't know, of course. To them, I was just Coach Jason, the guy who taught them how to grip a curveball and reminded them to keep their eye on the ball. They didn't see the man who'd spent the morning signing papers that ended a decade-long marriage. They didn't see the guy who'd spent the last year piecing himself back together, one awkward day at a time. They just saw a guy with a whistle around his neck and a bucket of baseballs at his feet. I crouched down to adjust one kid's batting stance, my knees creaking in protest. "Choke up on the bat, Tommy," I said, nudging his hands higher. "You're not trying to hit a home run every time. Just make contact." He nodded, his face serious, and I stepped back to watch. The crack of the bat sent the ball skittering into the outfield, and Tommy took off running, his little legs pumping like pistons. The other kids cheered, and I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. It was moments like these that kept me grounded. The simplicity of it all. The dirt under my cleats, the smell of leather gloves, the sound of a ball hitting a mitt. No drama, no ulterior motives, just a bunch of kids playing a game they loved. It was a far cry from the chaos of the last year, from the sleepless nights and the endless arguments, from the way Kathleen's perfume used to linger in the air long after she'd left the room. I glanced at my phone, tucked in the pocket of my coaching jacket. No new messages. Not that I expected any. Kathleen and I hadn't spoken since the day I handed her the photo of her lover's newborn son. She tried to reach out a few times, her texts full of apologies and promises to change, but I never responded. Some doors, once closed, are better left shut. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The kids were starting to tire, their energy waning as the shadows grew longer. I blew the whistle to signal the end of practice, and they gathered their gear, chattering about pizza and video games. I watched them go, their silhouettes fading into the distance, and felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I packed up the equipment, the familiar routine comforting in its monotony. As I locked up the storage shed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The guy staring back at me looked older, more weathered, but there was a lightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was the freedom of finally letting go. Maybe it was the realization that I didn't need Kathleen, or anyone else, to feel whole. I drove home with the windows down, the cool evening air rushing in. My apartment was small, just a one-bedroom with a leaky faucet and a view of the parking lot. But it was mine. I poured myself a drink, a simple whiskey on the rocks, and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The quiet was a gift, one I hadn't appreciated until now. Later, as I lay in bed, the faint sound of a baseball game playing on the TV in the background, I thought about the life I'd left behind. The trophies, the photos, the promises, all of it was gone now, packed away in boxes or sold off to strangers. But as I drifted off to sleep, I realized I didn't miss it. Not really. What I had now, the simplicity, the quiet, the freedom, was enough. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like more than enough. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, cutting through the late afternoon quiet. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. The number had been burned into my memory, though I deleted it months ago. Kathleen. She called 3 times this week already, and each time I'd let it go to voicemail. This time, though, something made me pick it up. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit the old baseball glove hanging on the wall, casting a shadow that looked like a crack running through it. Or maybe it was just the weariness of pretending I didn't care anymore. Jason. Her voice came through, soft and hesitant, like she was testing the waters. I know I don't deserve to ask, but can we talk? Just once. I leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the kids playing catch in the field across the street. The sound of their laughter drifted in, mingling with the faint crack of a bat from the TV in the living room. For a moment, I let the noise fill the space between us, let it remind me of what I'd built since she left. A life that didn't include her. I don't think there's much left to say, I replied, my voice steady, though my grip on the phone tightened. You made your choices. I made mine. She exhaled sharply, like I'd slapped her. You're still angry. No, I said, and it was true. The anger had burned itself out months ago, leaving behind something colder, harder. I'm not angry. I'm just done. There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, almost pleading. I miss you, Jason. I miss us. Don't you think we owe it to ourselves to try again? I closed my eyes, the words hitting me like a dull ache. For a split second, I saw the life we'd had. The dinners, the late-night conversations, the way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes. But then I saw the other things too. The lies, the hotel receipts, the way she'd looked at me when she said, "It's just passion. You wouldn't understand." And just like that, the ache turned to something else. Resolve, maybe, or relief. You don't get to do this, I said, my voice low but firm. You don't get to rewrite the story now that it's convenient for you. I've moved on, Kathleen. You should too. She started to say something, but I didn't let her finish. Take care of yourself, I said, and then I hung up, the click of the phone echoing in the quiet kitchen. I set it down on the counter and turned back to the window. The kids were still out there, tossing the ball back and forth, their shouts carrying on the breeze. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. The phone stayed silent after that, and so did I. The sound of children laughing outside my window pulls me out of my thoughts. I'm sitting in my recliner, a well-worn baseball glove resting on the coffee table in front of me. The leather is cracked and faded, a relic from a life that feels both familiar and foreign now. I pick it up, running my thumb over the stitching, and for a moment, I'm back on that field, Kathleen cheering from the stands, her smile brighter than the summer sun. But the memory doesn't sting like it used to. It's just there. A chapter closed, a lesson learned. Love isn't about grand gestures. I used to think it was flowers, surprise vacations, late-night whispers promising forever. But those are just decorations. The real foundation is respect, trust, priorities. And when those crumble, no amount of grand gestures can rebuild them. I learned that the hard way. Kathleen taught me that, though not in the way she intended. The kids outside are playing some kind of game, their voices carrying through the open window. One of them shouts, "You're out!" And there's a burst of laughter. I smile, setting the glove back down. It's funny how life circles back to the simple things. Coaching these kids, teaching them how to swing a bat, how to field a grounder, it's become my anchor. They don't care about my past, about the mess I left behind. They just want to play. And in their laughter, I find a kind of peace I didn't know I was missing. Kathleen called me a year after the divorce was finalized. Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she was testing the waters. "Can we talk?" she asked. I could hear the weight in her words, the unspoken plea for forgiveness, for a second chance. But forgiveness isn't a magic eraser. It doesn't undo the choices she made, the priorities she chose. I told her I'd already said everything I needed to. The sound of a baseball game crackled faintly in the background as I hung up. Walking away wasn't easy. There were nights I sat in the same chair, staring at the glove, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But love isn't about holding on when it's tearing you apart. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Out of respect for yourself and for the life you deserve. The sun's starting to set now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The kids are heading home, their voices fading into the distance. I lean back in my chair, the quiet settling around me like an old friend. I'm not the same man I was a year ago. The scars are still there, but they don't define me anymore. They're reminders of what I've lost, yes, but also of what I've gained. A new beginning, a life built on my own terms. And as I sit here, listening to the faint hum of the evening, I realize something. I'm okay. More than okay. I'm free.